Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf chet. We're going to get started at the bottom of our daf zayin amabet. Today's daf is sponsored by Rachel Chefetz in loving memory of her aunt Rose Rubelo, Rachel Bat Harav Moshe B'tzipora Mashbaum, whose yurt site was on the 26th of Adar. We're going to get started now with. We'll just go back for one quick minute to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. We'll skip Rabbi Yochanan right now in terms of our review, but Rabbi Elazar is the one we're going to deal with right now. He says the machloket with two people holding onto a star is when both are equally holding onto the tofes and the torah. But if one was holding on to the torah, which was the main part, the body of the star, which has the date, versus the tofes, and the other one was holding the tofes, which only has the details without the date in it, which we said was relevant, which we're going to see inside, because you cannot collect that from lien property because you always need to know the date of the, right? When you collect from lien property, it's only starting from the date that the loan happened. Because anyone who buys, let's say, I owe money, anyone who buys property from me is supposed to check into and see my history and see if I have any loans out. If the loan happened before, then they would know about the loan. If the loan happened after, they wouldn't. So if there was no date on the loan and we have no idea when the loan happened, you can't collect from lien property, or my property is not lien to the loan, basically. So therefore, the tofes is worth less. Okay, and we're going to get into this right now. So now the Gemara had asked, let's start from Amar Rab Achami Difti the Ravina, about 8 lines from the bottom. He asked Rabbi Elazar da Amar Zeno tel tofes v'zeno tel toref lamale. There's a few different ways of understanding this question. I'll explain it one way, which is that the question is really to the love. Remember, it's not just two random people holding a talit and each one claims half. We have two people holding a shtar chov, right? But one claims I'm owed this money by the other person. And the other person who's holding it says, it's mine and I already pay back the money. In other words, yes, I did take out a loan from you, but I already pay back the money. So what's it going to, some people think the question is about the love. What is it going to help the love to have a tofes or a torah? In other words, it's not going to help him. If we say that it's valid or it's not valid or whatever it is, it's not going to help the love because the love it can't collect anything based on this. So what is the monetary value of it? It doesn't make any sense, really. So, and what? We're going to give him the half a piece of paper that has the Torah for what he's going to use it to cover a jug? Doesn't make any sense. Amr lay. So what did he answer him? Blidame. What we mean here is that okay, now let's get into numbers here. Let's say the promissory note was for $1,000. Okay, I owe you $1,000. Now we're each holding it, we're fighting over it. You have the part with the date, I have the part without the date, or the reverse, it doesn't really matter. We'll discuss both cases. How do we evaluate? Now, you would have thought, what's the value of this shtar? $1,000, but it's not true. The value of this shtar is, if you went and sold this promissory note on the market, what would it be worth? Now, let's think about it. A promissory note for $1,000 doesn't sell for $1,000 because the person who buys it never knows, am I actually going to pay the money back? What if I don't have money? What if, you could take it from land? What if I don't have land? Now, again, now you start getting into what's the difference between Torah for tofes. What is the market value of this promissory note? So let's just take some random numbers. Let's assume if you can sell it, if it's the Torah, you can sell it on the market for, let's say, $900 because it's lien to property, assuming I have property in my name, right? I had property at the time the loan was taken. So you could probably have a strong likelihood of getting your money back. Also, by the way, another reason it's worth less is because you can't collect it today, right? In other words, it's, let's say, a promissory note for a year from now. So you're going to be out of money for a while. So you'll pay $900 in the hopes of getting $1,000 down the road. If it doesn't even have a date, then let's say it's worth $700, okay? So because then if it doesn't have a date, if it's just the tofes, you won't be able to collect it from lien property. So it's only going to be if I have cash on hand that you'll be able to get it back. That's obviously a much bigger risk. So let's say those are the numbers. So now they say, how does it work? Da'amar hachi, we say the following. Shtaradi bezman kamashave. Udele bezman kamashave. This goes back to, we talked about Nizikin. What's a person with an arm? What's a person without an arm, right? That's how we evaluate damages. So this is how we evaluate the Torah and the tofes. It's worth 900 with the Torah. It's worth 700 with just the tofes. So that's the difference, okay? And remember, that's what's going to happen. The difference one of them gets. Whoever has the toref is going to get that $200. And then the rest we're going to split. So let's spell it out. Okay, so first of all, they're going to say this. First, let's just explain it inside. B'shtar de'it bezman, they're already going to tell us, which we already know, if it has the date in it, gavim mishavde, you could collect it from lien property. V'idach lo gavim mishavde, but the other part you won't be able to. So therefore, yav leheach de bene bene, one is going to give to the other the difference, meaning the one who has the tofes is going to lose that $200. V'yachloku nami da'amaran ledame, and then the rest that they're going to split is going to be, again, the market value. So let's just play out the numbers. If the malveh is holding the toref, the part that's worth more, then what happens? So the malveh immediately $200. This is worth $900, even though the whole thing was $1,000. Right now, it's worth $900 in the market value. 200 immediately goes to the malveh, gets cut off the top, goes to the malveh, and then the rest gets split 50-50, meaning the lova has to pay what's left now, $700. Lova has to pay $350. That's how it's split. If the lova ends up with the toref, with the more expensive part, then we basically deduct that amount from what, so by the way, in the first case, right, the malveh is going to collect from the lova the $350 plus the $200, he's going to get $550. If it's the reverse, basically the lova is only going to have to pay $350. Because we're going to say with the lova is going to deduct the $200 off what he owes. So it's already down to $900, then it goes down to $700, and then only has to pay $350. That's basically how it works. Now they're going to say, yachloku nami damaran, in general, in the sources where we saw yachloku, also ledame is also going to be the value. And now we're going to try to prove it from 3 sources. 2 are our Mishna, and 1 is a Braita. The first 2 will be rejected. This will be a theme today. I'm going to have a slew of attempts to try to answer questions, and only the last one is going to work. So now they want to say, here, I'll prove to you that yachloku has to be the market value. In other words, again, what you sell it for in the market. If you don't say this, if we're both grabbing on this talit and you cut it in half and you don't sell it, right? In other words, again, either we cut it in half or we go by what's the market value, what's the resale value of this talit, and then we split that 50-50. Now, if you cut it, well, both sides are gonna lose. What do you do with half a talit? Okay, it's like half a shirt, right? What do you do with half a shirt? A half a talit is a little bit different because a talit doesn't have sleeves, and a half a shirt really is useless. Half a talit could be useful for something, and that's what we're going to say. This doesn't prove anything. Halokashia dechazia liktanim. Small children, if you cut the talit in half, a small child can wear it. It'll be a full talit for the child. Okay, so that's not a good proof. Second proof. Now, you want to say it's kids? Well, Hada Amar Rava, Imaitat talit mushevet chokim. This actually, sorry, it's my mistake. It wasn't a tannatic source. It was what Rava said. Rava said that if the talit was gold, if it had gold in it, hachanami depalgela hafsedua. Now, let's try to give a gold talit to a child, right? If the talit had gold in it, it wouldn't be worthy for children. You would never give a talit with gold in it to a child. That talit has no way to split other than selling it, and therefore it must be the resale value. But halokashe dechazia lebnei menachim. What do you mean? Children of kings wear gold talitot. So there is a case, so it doesn't necessarily prove it, maybe a rare case, but it doesn't prove anything. The haditnan, what about the fact that the Mishnah says, go back to our Mishnah, okay, here's a pretty good proof. You can't cut an animal in half. What do you do with half an animal? To which the Gemara says, well, maybe you could. What do you mean? A kosher animal you could slaughter and cut in half. You can have the meat, split it 50-50. But if it's a non-kosher animal, hafsedua, you actually then will really lose out. And therefore, from here we learn ela ledame, hachanami ledame. Now, why they don't suggest you could sell it to a Gentile or something, but they don't suggest that. Anyway, the point being, it's its value, and we've proven it from the case of the animals. Okay, now we're going to move on to a new section. Amar Rami bar Hama. Zot omeret. This section of the Gemara, I will warn you, is kind of complicated. It's complicated conceptually to understand fully what they're discussing here, but we'll try our best to explain. Ami Rami bar Hama. Rabbi bar Hama is going to say, we're actually going to start with Rami bar Hama, move to Rava who disagrees with him, go more into Rava, and then come back to Rami bar Hama. Rami bar Hama is going to prove something from our Mishnah. It's going to be a little complicated to understand at first because we're not really going to understand where in the Mishnah he proves this. And that there are going to be 5 attempts later to figure out which line in the Mishnah. We're going to basically go through every single line in the Mishnah and eventually say we're going to learn it from the last line in the Mishnah. But right now it sounds like he's learning it from the basic case in the Mishnah. Zot omeret, hamagbiya metzia lechavero kana chavero. We can infer from our Mishnah the following halakha. Let's talk about the halakha outside of Rami bar Hama, and then we'll get back to it where he gets it from. So if you see an item, or I find an item on the ground, let's say, and I decide to pick it up for you, is it yours or is it mine? Do I have the rights to pick up a lost item and have it acquired to you? What would be the relevance? What if I change my mind and I say, you know what, I want to keep it myself? Well, if I already gave you the rights to it, then I can't just change my mind about it, okay? Because it's yours, basically. So if I, let's say, give you a gift, okay, let's start with something more basic. If I give you a gift, okay, some people do this. You're not supposed to gift people. You're not supposed to give people gifts on Shabbat because you're basically doing a kinyan. So some people do it. They'll give it to someone in their house and say, acquire this for the person I'm going to give a gift to. This is like the halachic way to do it. Accept this on their behalf. And then it's already theirs. And this is based on a principle, zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. If it's something that's good for the person, then you can do it even if they're not there. So that's a basic case where I can cause someone to acquire, so I can acquire something or someone else can acquire something on a different person's behalf, even without them being there. A Metzia is a little bit different, and this we're going to get into also on Daf Yud. A Metzia is a little different because when I have a lost item on the ground, it's theoretically could belong to anybody. Anyone can pick it up. So the question is, now, if I'm giving you a gift, that's one thing. That doesn't really matter. It's not like there are other people vying for that gift. Okay, it's mine. I can decide what I want to do with it. So I can give it to you and someone else can acquire it on your behalf. But if it's something that's going to cause a loss to other people, now if I take an item for you, okay, again, I don't want to get too much into this today. We're going to get into it much more on Daf Yud. It's really the central sugya there. And also today we have a lot to do. So I don't want to spend too much time in this about thinking why this is. We'll get to it on then. But if it's going to cause a loss to other people, then I may not be able to acquire it for you. Okay, that's a thing. First of all, when it comes to a loan, we definitely say that. Okay, if it's a loan, the question is Metzia like a loan or not. If I owe money to a lot of people and you come to collect from me, so you'll get the money and the other collectors won't because maybe I'll run out of money. So can you send someone else instead of you and get the money from me for this loan? So the halakha is no. If it's going to cause a loss for other people, someone else can't acquire the money on your behalf because you can do it yourself. You could come collect your loan, but you can't send someone else. Okay. So what this is basically saying, a Metzia might be the same thing because a Metzia is something potentially anyone can own. So by you taking it from me, you're basically causing, or you're taking it for whoever, let's say you're taking it from me, you're causing a loss to other people. Okay, that's the issue here. So comes Rami bar Hama and he says, I have no problem with this. This is fine. Magbiya metzia lechavero kana chavero, and I'm going to prove it from our Mishna. That's what he's going to say. Meaning you can pick up a lost item for me. I'm not there or I am there. It doesn't really matter. And it's mine. You can't change your mind about it after that then. You can't say, oh, you know what? This is really nice. I want to keep it for myself because you already acquired it on my behalf. That's effective. In another minute, we'll see that Rava disagrees with this. He says you cannot. Okay, and like I said, we're going to get to this on Daf Yud also. So Rami bar Hama says this can be inferred from our Mishna. Now, why is this? Now, this is the more complicated part of it, which is what? Each person in our Mishna is picking up half an item, right? They're not picking up the other half. Now, there's a concept that if you pick up half an item, that's hefker, okay? You pick up an item, you want to acquire it by lifting, but half of it is still on the ground, okay? And you only lift up half, and the other part is dragging on the ground. Since it's on the ground, okay, there's different reasons why this might be. Perhaps it's considered like in a different domain, but basically you haven't acquired the object because half is still on the ground. So take our case. We're each holding half. From my perspective, I'm only holding half, and the other part is like it's on the ground because you're holding it. It's kind of like, now this is why it's not exactly, but it's kind of like it's on the ground. And therefore, they say, if when you pick up your half of the talit, You're not acquiring it on my behalf. Now, this is going to be a little weird, but hold on a minute. It's as if each side is lying on the ground for the other person. When I pick up my side, if you have nothing, can't do anything for me, then when you pick it up, from my perspective, it's as if it's on the ground. And likewise, the reverse. So, okay, bear with me for 1 minute and we'll try to explain it better. And then neither of us will actually be able to acquire our half because the other half, as far as we're concerned, is on the ground. Therefore, you must infer from here. Now, what is he basically going to say? Therefore, in order to make the other half not on the ground, in order to allow me to acquire at least my half, when you acquire your half and lift it, you're basically also giving me rights to it. You're saying, from my perspective, it's not really on the ground. Okay? You're not exactly acquiring it for me. Okay? And this could be a little bit of a problem. Which part of the Mishnah are we actually going to learn it from? But basically what we're saying is, and let's just talk about it divorced from the Mishnah, and we'll get to how this connects to the Mishnah soon, later on in this side of the daf. But what's happening basically is we each understand that if we don't help the other, we're basically going to end up with zero. So we each have in our mind that when we lift this, it's like we're taking it off the ground for the other person. Okay? It's like I'm giving you some rights to it. And therefore he says, since I can lift this and with that give you rights to it, then basically I can then take anything I find on the ground and acquire it on your behalf. It's a bit of a jump, and that's what Rava is going to say. This isn't the same thing. But that's what Rami Bar Hama says. We'll come back to Rami Bar Hama when we try to prove him from the different parts in the Mishna. Now we're going to move to Rava. I'm a Rava. Rava says, no way. You can't lift an item off the ground and acquire it for someone else because you're causing a loss to everybody else. So how does the Mishnah work? It says the Mishnah is a whole different story. And here there's a big distinction. In our case, when you lift your half and I lift my half, I'm acquiring it for myself. While I'm acquiring it for myself, I can also acquire it for you. In other words, I can't pick up an item on the ground and say, oh, I'm picking this up for you, because I'm not acquiring it for myself at all. So since I'm not acquiring it for myself, I can't acquire it for you. But if I acquire the item for myself, I can also, with those rights that I've acquired it for myself, because think about it. Basically, what he's going to say is, if you're causing a loss to other people, it doesn't work. So if I take a random item that everybody in the community can pick up and I lift it for you, that's unfair. Gives me, again, we'll get into the logic of why this is. Maybe it gives me an unfair advantage. It gives you an unfair advantage. You're not even there. You let someone else pick it up for you. What about, right? It's causing a loss for all these other people. But if I already acquire it for myself in any way, don't allow other people to pick it up, then I can give you some of my rights. And that's how we use our Mishna. Okay? What Rami Bar Hama tries to prove from our Mishna, he says that's not a fair comparison. The Metzia, you want to lift entirely 100% for the other person. That doesn't work. If I'm somewhat acquiring it for my own sake, then I can acquire part of it for the other person's sake. And that's the case in our Mishna. So he says it works from a different principle, not from that. And therefore, no. Teda. And now he's going to prove it, because he says, Ilu amar l'shlucho, say ugenovli, v'ganav patur. 1 second, I just want to look up one thing on this. Second, let me check one quick thing. Okay, so now we're going to say the following. If I tell you, go steal something from me, and then you steal it, what have we learned? This is a very famous case. This is called ein shliach lidvar avera, which is also something we're going to deal with on daf Yud. But if I send you to do something for me, and I say, go steal it, we have this principle, divrei arav, divrei talmid, divrei mishomim, When I tell you to go steal, you have me telling you to steal, but you have God telling you don't steal. So what, you're going to listen to me instead of God, right? So you are at fault and not me. So if I tell you go steal, I do not acquire that item, okay? So I don't acquire it at all. But if two people steal together, let's say we go rob a bank, and I get the door open and hold everybody at gunpoint, and you take the money. So you've done an act of acquiring on the money. I haven't. But yet, chayavim, I'm also liable. Why am I liable if I didn't do a kinyan? My time, alav mishum damrin, amigo dezache lenafshe zachinami lechavre. Because I acquired it, because you acquired it on behalf of you and me, right? Where you already acquired it for yourself, therefore you can acquire it for me as well. Then that works, okay? So that's this principle. He says, here I can prove it to you from the case of the shutvi, that it only works when you acquired it for yourself, that you also acquire it for me. Shma mina. Okay, that's Rav. Now, before we get back to Rami bar Hama and try to figure out where on earth in our Mishna does he learn it from, we're going to first say something else that Rava says. Amar Rava, hashchida amar tamrina migo. Since we have this migo, since you can acquire something for yourself, you can acquire for someone else. Part of what's complicated about this stuff is you have to know all sorts of other things. So, the first thing you have to know here is a pikach lifts something, right? Acquires, for sure they can acquire something. A cheresh is someone who's a deaf mute. A deaf mute is considered without dad. Okay, if you haven't yet heard the series of Alana Stein, Hain on cheresh Shoten Katan, it's a good time to review. When I'm not about a month or two ago. The cheresh is basically doesn't have dad. Now, if a cheresh picks up a lost item, according to Torah law, it's not theirs. However, you might remember that in Gittin we learned, because of Darkei Shalom, we want to create a nice society. We don't want a place where a deaf mute picks up an item and somebody grabs it from him and says, hey, it's not yours, and basically they'll be in the right. So, Mipei Darkei Shalom, to create a better society, we basically say, if a cheresh picks up an item, it's theirs. Okay, finds an item on the ground, but only by rabbinic law. So now this gets a little complicated. If a cheresh and a pikach both lift up an item, this is what Rava is going to say. Mitoch shekana cheresh kana pikach. Since the cheresh can acquire the item, so does the pikach. Okay, this is going to be a little bit complicated, and they're not going to understand Rava, and they're going to reject this, okay? They're going to have 3 readings of Rava until they finally understand what Rava was saying here. So, Bishlam HaCheresh Kana, the Kamag Bele Bendat. Now, remember, he agrees with Rami bar Hama in theory that one has to basically give rights to the other, okay? So, what he's going to say is this. Since he just says that it works based on amigo, though, not because he thinks that our Mishnah, okay, when each one lifts up, again, this is this concept, when each one lifts up their item, they're basically giving rights to the other side. So we have 2 people, a cheresh and a pikach. Okay, a pikach is a regular person, a cheresh is this deaf mute. The pikach, when he lifts his side, he has in mind that he's also lifting it so that it's not really considered off on the ground for the cheresh. So with that, he's basically giving rights to the cheresh, and he can do that because he has the power to do that. Okay, so that's why the cheresh can actually acquire it. They can acquire their half because Darkei Shalom, they're allowed to pick up lost items, and the other side isn't considered on the ground because the pikach kind of gives him rights to that, so that it's not considered on the ground for him. But ela pikach b'ma'ikani, but how can the pikach acquire his side? Because yes, he can lift up his own side, and that's a kinyan, but the other side for him is considered on the ground. Because the cheresh picking it up is nothing compared to him. The cheresh picking it up only works because of Darkei Shalom, but it doesn't work. The cheresh can't basically say, oh, look, I'm giving you rights that it's as if my side is off the floor for you. You can't do that because he doesn't have rights to do that. So therefore, it can't possibly be the cheresh, right? You can't say because the cheresh, right? Pikach or cheresh igbiu Metzia, mitoch shekana cheresh kana pikach. Since the cheresh can acquire it, also the pikach can. That's not true. The cheresh can't help the pikach, and the pikach, it's like he's carrying, right, lifting something. The half is still on the ground, which wouldn't work. Okay, so attempt number 2 to understand what Rava said then. Ela ema cheresh kana pikach lo kana. So let's say what we just said, which is the cheresh can acquire, the pikach can't. So now the problem is that the beginning of Rava's statement was now that we said migo. So what migo is working here to say the cheresh is acquiring, the pikach is not. Migo, the shnei charshim ba'alma kanu. The migo is that since two deaf mutes together, one held one side and one held the other, that will work. So hainami kane. So therefore, right, imagine it. It's just logical, right? Mitoch is like, if this could work, then that could work. If we had two chershim, each one holding on to each side, since both can acquire mishum darkei shalom, they're both at the same level. So each one can basically cause the other to acquire, right, the other side and basically consider it not off the ground. And therefore that would work. So now we say, since that would work, then obviously what it's going to be obviously better for the cheresh if there's a pikach on the other side, and therefore that would work. And that's the migo. But the Gemara says, this still doesn't work. There's a huge hole in your argument, Rava. Hama, imtim salomar, hamagbia Metzia lechavero kanach chavero. If you're trying to say that you can lift an item for somebody else, why? Because you're zoche for your, what gives you the rights according to Rava? The fact that you can acquire it, right? That you can acquire it, Rava, if you were to say, sorry, I said this wrong. Rava doesn't think, right? If you could say, I have the rights to pick up an item for someone else entirely, then, right, that would, you say though, that's if you do it with the intent for the other person. But but this person is doing it for themselves. They're not, the pikach is not lifting it for the sake of the cheresh. The pikach is lifting it for their own sake. Now, ihu lo kani. Now you're telling me the pikach can't acquire it. Well, la'achrine makne. The whole premise of this is that the cheresh is going to acquire it because the pikach can acquire it, right? Because the pikach, when the pikach lifts it, has in mind for the cheresh, right? That he's helping the cheresh. But the pikach himself can't even acquire it for his own sake, right? Because that's what we just said. Since the cheresh's side is like it's on the floor for him, he can't himself acquire it. So therefore, how on earth is the pikach's act of acquiring it to help the cheresh when it doesn't even help himself? And his whole point was to lift it for himself. If it doesn't work for him, it can't certainly work to keep it off the ground for the cheresh. So therefore, we change Rava entirely. Basically, we say there must have been a mistake in the way they transmitted Rava. Instead of saying they both acquired or one acquired or this, right? No, neither of them acquires it. And that's for what we just said. Now, the chitem, if you want to say, wait a minute. Two chershim together can lift it and they'll each acquire it. But if you put a pikach on one side, it's going to make it worse. That sounds counterintuitive. They say no. It's not counterintuitive at all. The reason why they allow pikim to acquire things is why? Because if a cheresh picks something up, someone can steal it from him, right? And just take it away. And that would be humiliating. You know, if a regular person can pick it up, also a cheresh should be able to pick it up and keep it for him or herself. But But in this case, if you have a cheresh and a pikach on two different sides, and it doesn't work for the pikach to pick up the Metzia, well, then the cheresh won't get offended. Oh, why mine are people taking away when the pikachs, they're able to take away from him. So basically, basically this doesn't work at all. Okay, where's the migo? The migo is that since the pikach can't be koneh for himself, then he also can't have it acquired for the other side, right? In other words, that's the whole thing. Migo de zache lenafshe zache lechavre. Only if you acquire it on your own can you give it to somebody else. In a case where you can't acquire it for yourself, like the pikach in this case can't because the other side for the pikach is on the ground, therefore the cheresh also won't be able to acquire it. Okay? That's how it works. Now we go back to Rami Bracha. So the structure again was, we started with Rami Bracha, we moved to Rava. We then delved into Rava about this case that Rava said is a natural outgrowth of this, of migo dezache and lenafshe zache lechavre. I can acquire for myself, I can acquire for someone else. In other words, again, once I acquire part for me, I can give part to you. But Rami Bar Hama says, no, I can, even if I don't acquire it for myself, I can give it to somebody else and prove from our Mishna. So If we thought it was the basic case, that that's really what we thought. That each one is basically lifting for themselves and also helping the other side, because in the end it helps them. Okay, so, but there's a problem. What's the claim of the person in the first case of the Mishnah? I acquired the whole thing. That certainly doesn't mean I'm helping you and acquiring it for you. To say I'm acquiring it also for you, I'm lifting it up so it's not considered on the ground for you, that would mean I'm helping you and I'm helping your claim. But my claim is it's completely mine. So it definitely doesn't match that case. Okay, so attempt number 2. Now remember, there was ani mitzatia was case number 1, and then kula shali was case number 2. So maybe the fact that there's case number 2, and remember we asked the question at the beginning of the Masechet, seems unnecessary. Well, hatulamali, what do you need it for? Maybe you need it to teach you this extra halakha. The fact that it's extra, okay, this is just a concept. If you have something unnecessary, maybe it's coming to teach something else. Shma mina. Maybe it's coming to teach us this halakha of Rami bracha. But they say, what are you talking about? Didn't you learn daf bet, right? At the beginning of our Masechet and daf bet already, we already said the 2 cases are, one is a lost item and one is a spot item. You can't say then one, right? The second one is to teach you this halakha of Rami bracha. Okay, so option 3, we're just basically going through the Mishnah. And let me say, we had that weird case of, I say the whole thing is mine and you say half is mine. Hatu lamali, what do you need it for? You could have figured it out on your own. Do the math, figure out what you would do, right? If we each say the whole thing, then if you say whole, I say half. So unnecessary. So from the fact that it's unnecessary, here you can learn that you can pick up a lost item and acquire it on behalf of your friend. So then they say, that would assume the case number 3 is talking about a lost item and not a sale. Maybe it's talking about a sale. Maybe it's talking about a sale, and then you can't learn anything about lost items. Now, if you want to say, what's the chiddush to teach this by mekach umemkar, it would be obvious. No, I'll give you why it would be necessary. It's true. Now, remember what we learned about a mishiv aveda. If you return a lost item to someone, you never have to take an oath. Okay, why do you never have to take an oath? Because otherwise, you'll never want to return lost items. So, if you say the case is mekach umemkar, you could say the following. If I say only half is mine, then I'm basically giving you the other half as if I'm returning you a lost item. So, because half I'm saying is definitely yours. Now, you might say, and then I'd be exempt from an oath then, because I'm giving you half. So maybe that exempts me from an oath. And therefore, kamash malan, and then you'll learn, and this we saw before, you can basically use the system, right, to abuse the system, which is you can, if you really want it, but in the end, you might think that if I say half is yours, I'll get the other half without taking an oath. So better to say half is mine and get it without an oath than say the whole thing is mine and have to take an oath. So basically, if I say the whole thing is mine, I'll have to take an oath. If I say half is mine, I'll be in better shape. Therefore, we're going to say, the Mishna is telling us, no, even if you say half is yours, in order to avoid this abuse of the system, we make you take an oath also. And by the way, you're also only going to get a quarter. In other words, this guy's thinking was, oh, if I admit, then I'm giving back a returned lost item and I'll keep the other half for myself. But no, and without an oath. But no, the Mishna is going to tell you, no, you have to take an oath and you're only going to get a quarter, remember. Okay, so you can't learn it from there because that could be a case of a sale. So, let's go to case number 4, line number 4 in the Mishnah. What do you need to give a case about riding on an animal? It's the exact same thing as grabbing a talit. So, again, unnecessary case. If it's an unnecessary case, maybe you can learn from here that if you go on an animal, any kind of item you take for someone else, it works. Vidilma, maybe that whole thing about the ruchvim al beiman, this is going to be our next topic. Maybe it's trying to tell you that by riding on an animal, that's an act of acquiring. And therefore, again, you're riding on the animal. Each one claims it's mine. the fact that you're writing on it is sufficient to say it's mine. Teaching you nothing about, right? Not saying this is not an unnecessary extra case. So finally, we're going to get to the answer. Elami Seifa. Bizman shehem modim. And now I think it'll make a little more sense. Bizman shehem modim. If I agree that you have the other half, now, of course, it makes sense what Rami bar Hama said. If we both agree, each to the other, that the other half is theirs, then again, if I'm agreeing that when you lifted it up, it's effective, I'm basically saying that my side that I'm lifting, that theoretically for you should be like it's hanging on the ground, I'm basically acquiring it for you and basically making it as if it's not off the ground for your sake so that you can acquire your half. So that would be a case of if we're both admit or shayu edim, or there were witnesses that said we each picked it up at the same time, cholkim below shvuah. Then we get it without an oath. B'mai, what is this talking about? You don't even need to say this in Mekach Umemkar, because for sure, if we both agree that we each bought half an item, of course it would be valid. So it must be Elala b'Metzia. And then what's it trying to tell us about Metzia? That I can basically help you to acquire the other half. The Rava Amar L'cha, and Rava is going to say, what's his response to this? We already know. This only works because you're already acquiring half of it, right? You're already acquiring it for your own sake. Because I'm already acquiring it for me, I can also consider it off the ground for you. But that's only because it's working for me. But if I'm just acquiring it for you, it won't be effective. And that's back to the machloket between him and Rami bar Hama. Okay, that was the harder part of the daf. Now we're moving to the easy part. Shnayim rochavim. Two people are riding. Okay, now we're going to move away from our Mishnah. We're going to say something that actually seems to contradict the Mishnah. Only at the very end of the daf will we get to what, isn't the Mishnah a contradiction to this? And we'll resolve it. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef quotes, okay, we're going to have a little bit of different versions of who said what in the name of who. So we don't need to get too bogged down by that. But Rav Yosef says, Amar li Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said to me, turning now to Amabet, Shmat mina demar Shmuel tarte. I learned from Shmuel two things. Rachuv uman. I learned about someone riding on an animal, and I learned about someone leading an animal. Chad kane v'chad lo kane. Shmuel told me in class one day that one is a kinyan and one is not. One is an act of acquiring, one is not an act of acquiring. But I don't remember what Shmuel said. Which one is which? Which one works, which one doesn't? So the Gemara says, Hechidami, what on earth is he asking? If it's just me alone riding on an animal, or it's me alone leading an animal, okay, it's 100% manhig is going to work. Because if I take an animal and I'm moshech, this is called kinyan meshicha. That's the main kinyan you do in a big animal. You pull it. You can't lift it. It's too heavy. You pull it. So what is manhig if not pulling the animal? So of course that would work, which would mean it would be obvious that the rochev isn't going to work. So if you're going to say, right, so if you're going to say one of them is not kona, it must be that riding on the animal is not. So that can't possibly be Rav Yehuda's question because we could have figured that out. What we're asking is, if you have one person riding and one person pulling, which one is going to acquire? In other words, again, pretend you don't know our Mishnah, because our Mishnah seems obvious that both acquire, and that's going to be our question at the end of the Gemara, because we had two people riding, or one person riding, one person pulling, and we said both are konet. So this definitely doesn't seem to match our Mishnah, but we'll have to deal with that later. So we're talking about both people. My Rachav hadif to hatafisba. Do we say, look, the Rachav is actually physically touching the animal, the one riding on it? Or do we say the one who's leading is better because that's the one causing the animal to move? So he's more the leader, as we call him, the leader, right? That's the way you would call it. So maybe he would be konet. That's his question. So Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef now continues to tell what he heard. So he heard that Rav Yehuda quoted this name of the Shmuel and didn't remember which one Shmuel said. Is konet, which one isn't? But Amar li Rav Yehuda, then Rav Yehuda continued and said to me, next day, Anan, let's figure it out ourselves. Ditnan. Totally different case. We're talking about mixed breeds of animals. You take two different kinds of animals and you have them pull a wagon. So that's atzur. That's kilai. Well, the question is, who gets lashes for that? Ditnan, it says in the Mishnah, hamanhig, sofega arba'im. The one who leads it gets lashes. Vayoshev b'karon sofega arba'im. and the one sitting in the wagon, in the carriage. Both of them get lashes. Rabbi Meir poteret hayoshev b'karon. Rabbi Meir actually says the one sitting in the wagon, in the carriage, is exempt. Umida'apik Shmuel v'tani chachamim potrim et hayoshev b'karon. Now, that was the version he had of the Mishnah, but Shmuel flipped it. And Shmuel said the rabbis are the ones who exempt the one sitting in the carriage. So what do you see there? If the rabbis exempt the one sitting in the carriage, from here, what can you infer? Riding, right? What is the difference between riding an animal and sitting in a carriage? Same thing. Maybe not. We'll get back to that. But right now we assume same thing. So kol shekain rachubim kol manhi. So basically Rav Yehuda says, Shmuel flipped the opinions. There was a distinction between the leader and the one sitting. Must be it's the one sitting that's not the important one. It's not the one that can actually acquire. And that must be what Shmuel says. Now, Amalei Abai is going to take issue with Rav Yosef, not on content at all, just on who said what and how things went back. Abai says to Rav Yosef, I was in your shiur. Now, if you remember, Rav Yosef becomes forgetful later in life. And Abai says to him, I've been in the shiur with you. I remember you said, let's figure it out. And you yourself quoted this Mishnah, not you quote it in the name of Rav Yehuda. Amalei Ivra. Rav Yosef says, you think I forgot? No, I remember really well. Yes, Rav Yehuda told it to me. And Udachrina Nami da Amalei, and I remember that I actually retorted. I had a question against it. I remember the whole thing. And here's what I said to him. And here I said, we're going to suggest maybe they're not the same thing. How could you learn someone riding on a horse or a donkey or whatever it is from someone who's in a carriage? Yoshev lo tafis b'mosera. The one sitting in the carriage isn't holding the reins. Rachuv tafis b'mosera. But the one riding is holding the reins. And that's a different story. Holding the reins would be an act of acquiring. But Amr Li, and Rav Yehuda said to me, no, it's not. Rav Shmuel da Amri travayu mosera lo kani. Reins do not work to acquire. Why not? Think about it. What are you doing when you're holding the reins? You're sitting in place holding reins. You're not pulling them, you're not lifting them, you're just holding them and you're being moved by somebody else. That's not an act of acquiring. But now, okay, so now that's the first version. Some people say that it wasn't, again, this is going to be the same thing, but a little different who said what. Amalei Abai Rav Yosef, that the whole question of Rochev is Rochev like Yoshev B'Karon, sitting in the carriage the same as riding on the animal. It was asked from Abaye to Rav Yosef. Not that Rav Yosef said, I asked Rav Yehuda, but Abaye asked Rav Yosef, Hechi Pasha Ma Rachum Yoshev, Yoshev Lev Tafis B'Masera, Rachev Tafis B'Masera, same question, right? One is holding the reins, one isn't. Amalei Tana, Hachi Tana Idi, Mosera Lokane. Instead of quoting it in Rav and Shmuel, he quotes it from Idi. Idi has a bright that says Mosera Lokane. Now, Itmar Nami, here's another person who says this, and here we're going to make a bit of a distinction with the Moser. Amar Rabbi Chelbo, Amar Rav Huna, Mosera mechavero kana b'metzia b'nechsei ager lo kani. When does the reins not work? When you find a lost item. By holding the reins, you're not doing anything because you're getting it from nowhere, from nothing, right? Or nechsei ager, which is a ger dies and has no heirs, so you just acquire. But if you're doing a sale, and either they pass you the reins, okay, so that's called Mesira. Even some people say that's what Mosera is. It's called Mosera because when people sell an animal, what do? They give you the reins and then you take the animal. That's a kinyan because there's two sides. What is, right? The Moserot are imported when someone passes it to you. Or even if they say, go take my animal, take the reins. That already, by you taking the reins, that's an act of acquiring. But it doesn't work when there's no one on the other side to pass it to you because there's no Masira when it comes from nothing. Okay, so that's just an aside. Now, sorry, I lost my place. Okay. My Lashon Mosera, what is it? Why is it called Mosera? And that's what we're going to see. Amarava Idi Isberali. Idi explained to me, Ka'adama Moser Davar L'Chavero. It's like someone who passes something to a friend. Again, Bishlama Mechavero Kanat, Kamasar Lechavre. So from your friend, you could get it because somebody passed it to you. It's exactly what I just said. But nobody passed it to you in that case. You just picked it up from nothing, from no owner, no nothing. It wouldn't work. Okay, so Mosera Lokani, we're now going to say, is only when you get it from Hefker. Metzia. Now we get to our big question, which is, our Mishnah goes against everything we just said. We just said Rochev is not Kone, and Mosera Lokane and all that. So where we're talking here not about an act of acquiring, but not an act of kinyan where someone's passing it to you. You're just sitting on the animal and it was a lost, right? It was a lost animal. Mani, ilema Rabbi Meir. Now, if you say it's Rabbi Meir, now Rabbi Meir made this distinction and said, remember, once we switch the language, Rabbi Meir says the manhig and the yoshev are the same. They both get lashes. But hashta yoshev kane rechuv mebaya, you wouldn't need the Mishnah to teach you this. If sitting in the carriage is an act of acquiring, then of course riding on an animal will be acquiring, and then the Mishnah is just unnecessary. Elalav Rabban, and it must be Rabban. And Ushmamina Rachuv Kane. And what do you see here? Rachuv is Kane. And the rabbi said sitting in a carriage isn't. And we said Rochev and sitting in the carriage are the same thing. How could it possibly be? So Hacha b'mayas kina b'manhig b'raglav. We're now going to say that the person in our Mishnah who was riding on the animal was kicking the animal also to get it to move. It wasn't just riding. Riding regular wouldn't help. You have to be also leading, to which the Gemara is going to ask, well, then you're leading, you're not riding. That's called a leader. There's two ways of leading, and now they're going to flip it and say the following. You might have thought, what's the Mishnah teaching you? You might have thought if one's riding and one's leading by pulling from the front, the one who's riding is in a stronger position because they're physically on the animal. Comes the Mishnah to teach you, no, manhig and rochev, they're both the same. They're equal. They're both leading in an equal manner. Okay, so that's the end of our sugya. Let's start here with a quick review. End here with a quick review. So we started with this Rabbi Elazar about the Torah and the Tofas, and then we had to explain what's the difference, right? What is the value? And then we explained it's all about market value. And then we said, in general, Yachloka is market value. And then we basically tried to prove it from 3 different places. In the end, proved it from the 3rd. Then we brought this machloket Rami bar Hama or Rava, very interesting machloket. Are you allowed to pick up an item on behalf of someone else, or is it only in the case where you actually acquire it for yourself? And then we had a bit of something that Rava learned from here about the chayresh and the pikach. And then we had 5 attempts to prove where does Rami bar Hama derive this from our Mishnah, and because that's what he said, I derived this from our Mishnah. We had to figure out from where. 5 different attempts till we finally figured out it's from the last line of the Mishnah. Then we moved to the idea of rochev, and we basically said that rochev in general isn't koneh. Shmuel said anyway, right? We had to figure out who said what, figured out he said it, and holding reins is not a kinyan, but it is if somebody passes it to you, right? And then we said, what about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah rochev must be someone who's also leading, otherwise it wouldn't make any sense. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a good day and b'salot tovot.